Let's go ahead. We should talk. I mean, take advantage of the sexy voice when you got it.
Oh, sexy. That is one sexy man.
There you go.
Ooh, I like this raspy Jeb.
Yeah, the raspy Jeb. There you go. I love that. Thanks.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Warners, welcome to Women Your Mother Warned You About,
The podcast that makes business sexy again. I'm Rachel Pitts, mommy, wifey, and loan officer with U.S. Mortgage.
Oh, the singing lender. And I'm Gina Trimarco, founder and sales trainer at Pivot10 Results and Carolina Improv Company. Nice. I felt like I should sing.
Well, you know, we have talked about doing a singing thing together, so we probably should one day.
You know, that's like one of my first passions.
Yes, we've been through this numerous times, so we'll get to it.
If I could quit everything and be a singer, I would do it.
Well, you know, there's always that opportunity. You could. If your dream is big enough.
I'm going to manifest it.
There you go.
I'll be the singing improviser, and you'll be the singing lender.
I love it.
So, this episode, awesome, with our friend and my business crush boyfriend, Jeb. Love him.
I would like to point out two things. Number one, that Jeb was wonderfully gracious enough to join us, even though he has been getting over laryngitis, and he's got his kind of like the smelly cat from Friends sexy voice going on. And he gets better as he goes along. And I just am so grateful that he took the time, even though he wasn't feeling great, to do it. And also point out one more time that he makes a promise to Gina. He makes a micro commitment to Gina in this episode that I just wanted to poke her once more with.
We'll just leave it at that so that they can listen to this episode and hear what that micro commitment is that you're poking me about. He made a couple micro commitments, actually. Yep. One to me and one to us.
True.
We'll leave it at that. And I may point out that I was not as gushy on this episode with him.
I appreciate that. I just have to stand there and be like,
We all have our, our peeps. We all have our people. I mean, I'm sure you have someone you would gush over.
Well, here's what I have learned from my years in show business. The people that I most gush over, the way to get closest to them is to just act like it's no big deal. And like we do this all the time. And we're big friends that go back forever. I learned that on movie sets when I did movies way back when. I would do extra work in Montreal on movie sets. And basically the stars, the big name stars, they did not want you to come up and tell them how great they are. They just wanted to be treated like normal people. And so that's what I've learned in my 43 years.
Well, it's funny you should say that because in my television and film production days, it's the same thing. Like, I worked with celebs all the time, and I never asked for autographs. I never took pictures with them. I never did any of the, I sort of, Charlton Heston, I have a picture with him.
Nice.
And that's pretty cool. And that was a pretty cool time to, I was like his publicist in Chicago for a show. It's funny, though, that my crushes are a little more intense with people in business versus celebrities.
Right.
Maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe because it's their real, I don't know.
Well, and it's because you're drawn to their knowledge and what they have to say, and what you can utilize. Yeah. One thing this is a really good one, really quick before we get into Jeb. The only regret that I ever have of not playing groupie is I was with Roxy when she was about 3 at the airport picking someone up. And it was in Charleston, and Bill Murray has a house in Charleston, and he was walking down the hallway corridor towards us, and we were walking towards him. We were the only ones there, and I was like, my whole soul was like, ask him if he'll take a picture holding Roxy, and I didn't do it. I just left him alone, and I will regret that forever. Damn.
Yeah, but he probably appreciates it.
I looked him in the eye and I gave him a smile and a nod, but damn it. Mm-hmm. Anyway. So back to Jeb.
So back to Jeb, real quick, we're excited to have him back on. For those who are not familiar with Jeb Blount, he is the best-selling author of 10 books, and some of which I, over the years, have poked into in the sales training work that we do. Of course, giving him credit, because I'm not stealing his work. 10 books, and among the world's most respected thought leaders on sales, leadership, and customer experience. He flies all over the world giving amazing talks, and his Sales Gravy site helps thousands of salespeople every day with sales training and productivity acceleration. His new book that we're talking about today is Inked. I think it's really cool because on this episode, we talk about negotiation and the art of negotiation, and there's really no books out there. I did want to talk about, I forgot to bring it up, was that that other book, Split the Difference, because that's quite a negotiation book. I didn't want to bring that up and take that away from him.
I was trying to think of the name of that book all through the whole entire interview, and then after the interview, a friend of mine said, hey, I'm reading this book. I was telling him that we interviewed Jeb, and he said, oh, I'm reading this book about negotiation called Split the Difference. And I'm like, there it is. I couldn't remember the name.
While we actually were interviewing him, I actually Googled, because I remember the name of the author, but I couldn't remember the name of the book. So I Googled Christopher Voss, and I found it. And then I was like, nah, I'm not going to bring it up. But this is his time, and we want to make sure Jeb has his time. But to his point, there's really not a lot out there, and companies are not paying for that. They're not paying for negotiation training. They're paying for the basics in sales training. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. So for people looking for a negotiation resource, that this book is awesome, and we talk about it on this episode. So let's get started. Let's get started with this episode featuring Jeb Blount.
Thank you so much for joining us, regardless of the fact that you've got the, what was this, sexy cat? Or what was the smelly cat? Was that the thing?
Cat, yeah, I got smelly cat.
Welcome back to our show, Jeb.
I'm glad. Thank you for having me back on. It's a pleasure to be here.
I just feel like coming and taking care of you right now.
Thank you. I need somebody to take care of me.
Do you feel bad, or is it just in your throat?
I got sick right before Christmas, and for 2.5 weeks I felt awful, and so now I'm climbing out of it. So I feel a lot better, but my voice hasn't caught up with it. And I did 4 keynotes last week, and with laryngitis with his voice, and a couple of them were pretty long. So I'm having to recover from that as well. But the show has to go on.
Hey, I'm all about it.
That's right.
I'm all about it. So, Jeb, welcome back to our show. And now that we're talking about sexy voice, Rach, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to one of our signature questions, because I don't think we asked Jeb this last time, because we just started incorporating this question. And the question we ask at the end is, how do you define sexy?
How do I define sexy? Man, that is an interesting thing. I think if I were to give sexy a one word description, it's confidence. So sexy is relaxed, assertive confidence.
Ooh, relaxed, assertive confidence.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we just needed to, we needed to know how you thought of sexy. And I don't know if we ever asked Jeb, do you remember, Rachel, if we asked him how he would define a woman your mother warns you about? Did we ask you that before?
A woman my mother warns me about. Yeah. It'll make me blush. So.
You've been on this show before, so you know what you're dealing with.
I do know what I'm dealing with.
So you're not going to answer? Is that your answer?
It's the siren. It's the siren song. It's the woman who sneaks in and offers to help you, and then you find yourself upside down in the sand in Mexico someplace. You are.
Nice. That sounds like a real life story, which we will not delve into, but appreciate the upside down in the sand.
but let's no. We wanted to have you back on because we know you have a new book out. And we wanted to talk about it and learn some more amazing things from you. And your new book, Inked, thesis of your new book, is very blunt. Salespeople suck at negotiating.
Yes.
Is this a recent trend in your mind, or have salespeople traditionally struggled at negotiating?
Salespeople have always struggled at negotiating. It's not recent. It's forever. And for as long as executives have complained that their salespeople have been leaving too much money on the table, which they do, salespeople have struggled with negotiating. And there's lots of reasons why. One of the reasons is salespeople don't get a lot of training in negotiating. As much as sales training is given to salespeople, especially even in big companies, for the most part, negotiating is not taught. There's a couple of reasons why. One of the reasons is that the people who teach sales training, they pretty much suck at negotiating too. So they're not really good at it. And it's hard to teach something that you're either not good at or not comfortable with. Another reason is just, especially in the Western world, negotiating isn't part of our culture. We look at negotiating as something that we have to do if we have to. Like it's an icky thing. We look down on it. We try to avoid it at all costs. The other reason is that, especially when it comes to training, a lot of negotiating training is taught outside of the sales process. So there are great companies out there that teach negotiating, and they teach negotiating to a wide swath of professionals. And that training is really good. But the problem with it is that, especially for salespeople, and this book Inked is about sales negotiation, is that sales negotiation is not separate from the sales process. So if you got a bunch of people teaching negotiating to salespeople who aren't salespeople, don't know how to sell, they don't understand the process, they teach it as if you do all these things and then you negotiate, but it doesn't work that way. Another reason that salespeople suck at negotiating is that buyers are just better. Buyers get formal training in negotiating, especially people in procurement. They send them negotiating school. They know exactly how to play sellers. They're taught how to play sellers. So sellers are at a disadvantage. It's like an amateur team going up against a professional team, and the seller is always on the losing side of that equation.
Wow, that's okay. So let's talk about negotiating a little bit more. I wanted to segue to, I had the question, I just lost it.
That's the sexy voice. It does that to you.
Yeah, you know what? It's mesmerizing to me. Did you have a time in your life where you struggled with the negotiation process? Like, how did you get better at it if you struggled with it?
It was early in my career. I was in my early 20s, and it was January. My sales manager, a great sales manager, sat down with me with a spreadsheet, and he showed me something. He showed me all of the deals that I'd sold, and then my average discount from our standard rates on those deals. This was a contractual sale, so it wasn't just the deals, it was terms and conditions as well. So he showed me all that. And then he showed me that after I'd made my quota, so I'd made my quota in early September for the year. After I made my quota, my average discount dropped from 22.5% to 9%, almost overnight. And what he talked to me about was, like, everything was the same. I had the same customer, same contract, same issues, same things. The only thing that had changed was that I didn't need the deals anymore. So when I didn't need the deals, when I wasn't afraid of losing a deal, suddenly I became a much better negotiator. And in fact, I asked buyers for things that I would normally give away. I just said, no, that's what you have to pay for it. So, and then what was interesting with that trend was I actually closed more. I inked more deals after I made my quota on a weekly basis, on an average weekly basis, than I had before I made my quota. So the emotional discipline that I got from making quota naturally made me a better negotiator. And by the way, salespeople with full pipelines, better negotiators. Salespeople who have achieved quota, better negotiators. Salespeople who can sell like they don't need to sell, better negotiators. But that's not a really good strategy, right? So, I mean, everybody makes their quota, now you become a better negotiator. So what I learned from that was, okay, emotional control is the center of everything. So it's the person in the deal that exerts the greatest amount of emotional control that has the highest probability of getting the outcome that they desire. But that wasn't all. That was the piece of it. So I started studying negotiation. I invested in books. I went to seminars. I never went to anything on sales-specific negotiation because, honestly, until I wrote this book, that's a gratuitous book plug, there really hasn't been any negotiating training or books other than Patrick Tenney's Getting to Yes, which is a classic book on negotiating. And that's the only book out there other than this one that really focused on sales negotiation. Patrick's book really focuses on high-level, multi-million-dollar enterprise negotiation, and this book spans everything from your transactional all the way to enterprise. So, but I started trying to figure out what the art of negotiation was, and learned over time to be a better negotiator. And that doesn't mean that I haven't given away the farm. It doesn't mean that I haven't had my head handed to me at the negotiating table. But I learned a couple of things. One was MLP strategy. So if you think about negotiating and you put it into a box, negotiating at the center of the heart is your emotional discipline. Along with emotional discipline is sales process. So the one thing other than emotional discipline that will help you more than anything at the negotiation table is executing the sales process all the way through. The next is communication. So when we are negotiating, what are we doing? So how are we managing the buyers? So I created a concept early on called the deal communication framework, which is basically when I sit down and negotiate with someone, the first thing that I do is I get them to talk to me about what's important to them. Like I just try to get their list on the table. Then I explain my list. So they tell me what they want, then I tell them what I want. And what I'm trying to do is I'm creating basically value bridges. It says, listen, this is why my business case am worth this money. Then all we do at that point is, we just go back and forth. We just get alignment through some give and take on a deal. And then I learned this early on. As soon as someone commits, lock it down. Lock it down with a signature, lock it down with a handshake, get ink on paper, get digital ink on paper. If you're negotiating a really big deal and there's multiple steps, then as soon as you negotiate something and get agreement, lock it down. And then the final piece of this 4-part puzzle is something called MLP strategy. MLP stands for motivation, leverage, and power. And from the get-go, this, by the way, is the chessboard of sales. It's a chessboard of sales negotiation, and this is game strategy. From the get-go, when you walk into a deal, the one thing that we have to acknowledge as sellers is that the buyer almost always is in a better position. They have more power than the seller. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is they usually have more information. Why do they have more information? Well, they're talking to all your competitors. They also are probably doing a lot more research than you are. That's just how buyers work. And they have more information about their internal issues than you do. At the same time, they also have more alternatives. And power is derived from alternatives. So the buyer has the alternative to do nothing, to do it on their own, to choose one of your competitors, or to maybe just wipe the board and try something completely different. The more alternatives that a stakeholder group has, and you got to think there are multiple stakeholders in a deal, the more alternatives that that group of people perceives they have when they're dealing with you, the more power they have. And the more power they have, the easier it is for them to walk away. On the flip side of that is motivation. Now, where power is at the enterprise level, so it's the cumulative perceived alternatives of all the stakeholders. Motivation is at the individual stakeholder level. There's 2 levels of motivation, your motivation and their motivation. So for example, if I'm a salesperson, it's the end of the quarter, I've made a forecast and I'm about to miss that forecast, then I'm highly motivated to do a deal. The more motivated I am to do a deal as a salesperson, the less power I have because the less alternatives I have. In fact, I don't even have the alternative to walk away. And the more I'm willing to give up to get the deal. On the flip side are the individual stakeholders. And the stakeholders are making decisions, emotional decisions to do business with you. Basically based on 5 core questions. Do I like you? Do you listen to me? Do you make me feel important? Do you get me in my problems? And do I trust and believe you? And so for salespeople, Our job is engineering the sales process step by step by step by step and connecting with all the stakeholders to increase the stakeholders' emotional motivation to do business with you. People do buy you. Now, this is what's important. Power is derived from alternatives. Motivation is derived from the emotional connection to do business with you. In some cases, that motivation can be driven by time. It can be driven by aspiration. We can be driven by a number of things. But there's a motivation level with the individual stakeholder to advocate for you. So if we start looking at it that way, then what we find is that for stakeholders, the higher the motivation for the stakeholder, the lower the power, right? So they're inverse relationship because the cumulative motivation of the stakeholder begin to neutralize alternatives. Now, where does leverage come into play? So leverage is currency. When you are the weaker party at the negotiating table, and salespeople almost always are, the only way that you have to bend the behavior of the stakeholders so that you can engineer the sales process, so you shape the sales process to give you the opportunity to build a winning business case that neutralizes alternatives and at the same time interact with people so that you can increase their motivation to do business with you, is through leverage. Leverage is currency. And when you have currency, like, so for example, let's say that there were 3 people in this room with me and I held up a $100 bill and said, who wants it? Probably somebody would walk over and take the $100 bill from me. And in that moment, I use leverage, money, to shape the person's behavior to make them to move towards me, make them move toward me. So with leverage, for salespeople, leverage is your pricing, your information. It is time. It is your ability to give people solutions. So in some cases, it's your discounts. Like I'm holding on to discounts or I'm holding on to this. I'm able to use leverage to bend the buying process, the way the stakeholders want to buy, back to my sales process so that I can neutralize alternatives, to deep discovery, build business case, and at the same time, build relationships so that I increase the motivation to do business with me. The problem that sellers face, especially when they lack most emotional discipline, is that they have a tendency to give their leverage away for free. And a great example of that would be, for example, in an initial meeting, you sit down with the buyer and the buyer says, listen, your competitors have all been in here and they're lower priced than you. Before we can even talk about anything, I just need to know that you're going to be able to match their prices. And the salesperson says, yes, absolutely, I can. Can you tell me what their prices are? And then they get into an immediate conversation and the seller says, well, I could do it at 20% off. Boom, leverage gone, right? Versus saying, you know what, I tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't I listen to you and understand you a little bit better? Then we can talk about what we do. And then you and I can make a decision from there, whether or not it makes sense for me to come back with a tailored proposal of prices just for you. When the salesperson uses the leverage to get the person to have a discovery conversation versus giving it away, they begin shaping or bending win probability in their favor. This is game strategy. So when you put these things together, executing the sales process step by step by step all the way through, when you do a better job of communicating when it's time to deal with negotiating, and you leverage MLP, motivation, leverage, and power, to play the game the right way, suddenly what happens is you begin bending probability in your favor. We know that buyers are naturally going to enter most sales negotiations in a higher power position or a greater power position than the seller. But through this process, what happens is the seller begins to level the playing field, and then using motivation, influence frameworks, and an understanding of how people make decisions, along with playing the right game with the sellers and being able to explain their value, suddenly sellers get really, really, really powerful at the negotiating table. And if I just take you all the way back to my early 20s, over the course of 20 years of doing this, step by step, pain by pain, running into wall after wall, I learned how to leverage all of this to become a much more powerful negotiator and put a lot more money in the bank long term.
Hey Warners, this is Gina Trimarco, and if you know Rachel and I, you know how much we love our beauty strategies, especially Dermavogue, where we both go to keep our faces looking younger and healthier. Every time someone says to me, something looks different about your face, I can't help but to tell them that the Dermavogue team, led by Dr. James Turk, has been offering the greater Myrtle Beach area the best in cosmetic and aesthetic dermatology since 2003. Dermavogue combines expert medical knowledge with cutting-edge technology, bringing their patients the most effective, flawless solutions to any skincare or cosmetic need. Some of the services to consider include Botox, skin peels, facials, BioT, and much more. I personally love and highly recommend their Botox and lip injections for making my face look younger and healthier, and for BioT for improving my energy, sleep, and weight control. At Dermavogue, they gauge you in the process of total body health to ensure your satisfaction with their comprehensive selection of the most up-to-date, non-invasive cosmetic dermatology and spa treatments. If you want to look and feel your best, Dermavogue can help you get there. Schedule your consultation today by calling 843-357-2444 or visit dermavogue.com and tell them that the women your mother warned you about sent you. I want to go back a second to you said at the top of this that buyers are so educated in negotiation, especially from a procurement standpoint. So I'm curious on this, anyone who is dealing with a sale that has to go through a procurement process, especially like maybe government contracts. And I get this question a lot. How do you negotiate when they're playing the...
Okay, so a couple of things on that. And by the way, even with government contracts, so I've done tons of government contracts. We do government contracts in my business today, and the truth is that if it's a pure commodity play, the lowest bidder is going to win that deal. So let's just say they're buying, 100 pens. There's not a lot of differentiation in that particular play. So the whole sell me a pen, trope. But when you're selling things to the government that have additional value, the same thing's in play. You have a stakeholder group who makes a decision that they want to do business with you. And government contracts can be shaped because they can be built around the way the contract is written by the stakeholders when they really want to do business with you. So when you've been in early and you've done things with all integrity legally, but you've been in early and you met with the stakeholders have a say in what contracting does. Now, contracting has a play, like they have to go out and they pick the bidders. But when the specs of the contract are in your favor, this is neutralizing alternatives, right? So I don't want to do business with them because they're not going to help us solve our problem. And when the motivation of the stakeholder group is in your favor, then they will shape a contract to fit you. Now that's the government, and there are a lot of rules around that. But let's go back to commercial and working in commercial situations. I deal with procurement all the time. And I have to do this because some of my contracts, especially my training contracts, are really, really, really big.
Right.
And not just procurement, by the way, the legal team as well. So I got legal people, redlining contracts, and I've got the procurement team, saying, hey, we want you to drop your price on the 20%. Rarely do I start at procurement. And there are some salespeople who begin at procurement. I totally get that and I understand it. But if you're starting at procurement, then procurement is your stakeholders. However, when I'm teaching salespeople who sell, high-end capital goods, who are selling anything like, software or consulting services, and they get pushed into procurement first, my message to them is get out of procurement. You got to go find the stakeholders, because here's what happens. And we call this the negotiating triangle. So typically with negotiating triangle, you got the seller, right? You have the stakeholder group, and then you have procurement. The seller begins dealing with the stakeholder group. So the stakeholder group basically creates their criteria for evaluation. There also are individual stakeholder, success criteria. They have the outcomes, the business outcomes that they're looking for. We understand what their real estate is, and we understand what the future state is, where they want to go to. So we're building our business case for the stakeholder group. And one of the core principles in the book is you have to win first. In other words, before you negotiate, you have to become the vendor of choice. So when you're working with a stakeholder group, seller to stakeholder group, the key thing there is that they choose you. They select you as a vendor of choice. Now with big organizations, and I'm in the middle of one of these things right now with a massive organization where the stakeholder group picked us. And in fact, this is crazy, they already paid us. But we're dealing with we're negotiating now with procurement, even after they paid us. And procurement is clueless. Like they're negotiating like, I don't already have the money, but the money's already in my bank account. So I'm dealing with this procurement group. So when I'm in this situation, where I am with procurement is I just say, procurement says, I need you to do this, 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 and this. And I go, I've already been selected, and I've been selected with these terms. So what we need to do is we need to get the stakeholder group to come back and talk to you, because I can't do anything about this because I've already made this deal with them. And what happens at that point, because I have a stakeholder group who is motivated to do business with me, who sees only me as their alternative, right? So MLP, and they selected me as their vendor of choice. I tell them, go talk to the procurement group, and I tell procurement, you go talk to them. And they'll go back and forth, and there's always a dance, because there are egos involved. People have to feel like they've gotten everything done. But at the end of the day, 100% of the time, we always win. We always get what we want. Versus if I had gone straight to procurement, or I had not been selected as a vendor of choice, in either of those situations, I'm going to lose, or I'm going to give away a lot more in order to get what I want. So if we go back to MLP strategy, early on in the process, I'm asking the question, and this is one question I ask: after you choose me, after you select me as your vendor of choice, what happens next? Because I want to know early on, am I going to procurement? Because if I'm going to procurement, I can begin shaping the way that process looks very early on. Now, this goes back to sales process, right? Micro commitments, discovery, building business case, meeting all your stakeholders, mapping the stakeholder group. I mean, it's excellence all the way through the process. And this, by the way, is why you cannot separate sales process from sales negotiating. And it's why, so many negotiating trainings for salespeople fail, because we're not connecting those two things together. You want to be better at the negotiating table, you got to be the vendor of choice. You want to be the vendor of choice, you got to be a better job of selling yourself through the process and getting selected.
And there's so much that ties back to some of your other books. So looking at People by You, right? That's part of it. Looking at sales EQ and the emotional connection of it. We have a client right now that's a government contract, and it's kind of interesting hearing you say this, because I asked the question because just for my own edification, the stakeholder really wanted to work with us, right? So we created a really great relationship together to manage procurement before we got to procurement. Right. Yeah, so that was our negotiating of, all right, this is what it is. This is how much it is. How do we now get around some of the stuff, because they can only spend so much money without having to go to bid, and getting creative and creating a couple different components to it. Like this piece is training, this piece is coaching, and then how do you work the procurement system?
Yes.
But the key was in the relationship with the stakeholder.
Yes, exactly. That's the negotiating triangle, right? So if you'd gone straight to contracting, you'd just be doing a GSA bid and you just wouldn't get anywhere. And you're exactly right. So, because there's all kinds of ways people can buy stuff. And when people are motivated to do business with you, like that's motivation, right? Then their perceived alternatives decrease, and therefore they're willing to step up and find a way to work with you, even in those situations. And that's where people, people all the time tell me, B2G, so business to government, that, you just, there's a set of rules, and there's nothing you can do about it. So we just do bids. And, I just have to answer the question when they say that over and over and over again, BS, 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 BS. I've sold so many government bids. Won so many deals. And even in situations where I've been like at local with a city council opening up closed bids, and I won because I knew what was in the other bids, because the local people didn't want to do business with those folks, but they still had to go through the process.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do business with me, not because I was greasing their palms or doing anything that lacked integrity. They wanted to do business with me because they knew that I was the company that could solve the problem and do the right thing. Like they didn't want to deal with surplus issues.
Right.
They made sure that we won.
That's great. Thanks for answering that, because I think so many salespeople use as an excuse. I've heard it a lot that we can only go on a bid process, and so what are we going to do? That's the process.
Yep, it's like salespeople saying, they get an RFP, and I go, well, have you talked to them? And they go, well, no, the RFP says we can't talk to them. We have to send the RFP in. Bullshit. Yeah. That's making. Why would you say that? Here's what you do. You tell them that you're not going to respond to their RFP unless they talk to you.
I've done that. I don't want to waste my time.
Absolutely. They'll talk to you because they need you. They send you the RFP because they're filling out a big spreadsheet, right, with stuff in it. So your information that you're going to send the RFP is your leverage. Do not give it away for free. You want my information, then you have to do these things for me. Meet with me, have a conversation with me, talk to me about what you're doing. Let me do a little bit of discovery. Let me see if I can change the scope of the RFP, which I've done in the past. An RFP's come out. I've used my leverage to force them to meet with me, and then they redid the RFP and put it back out again with more favorable terms because they weren't educated in how to evaluate vendors in that particular situation. So, everything you have to think, I've got leverage, I've got currency, and I need to use that leverage and use that currency to bend the buyer's behavior, even if it's a little bit, because that's the only way in some cases I'm going to win. And by the way, if you're not able to use that leverage to bend their behavior, to get them to move toward you, the probability you're going to close that deal, that you're going to get ink, is almost zero. So move on to something else.
Good advice.
Thanks, Jeb. That is awesome. So let's think about the people who are like, oh, I just don't want to negotiate. I don't feel good. Like, I don't want to do that. Can they actually succeed as salespeople if they can't be willing or effective at negotiating?
I think certainly so. I think there are tons of salespeople out there that shy away from negotiating, and they're successful. I mean, their companies give them the ability to give maximum discount. I mean, these are typically the salespeople who go, okay, want to buy, and the seller, the buyer says, well, can you give me anything off on that? And the seller says, yeah, I got 20%. You want it all? Boom. Give it all away for start off. But certainly salespeople can be successful. The year that my sales manager pointed out, my poor negotiating skills, I was very successful. I got my quota early on. But here's the difference, and here's why this is important to you. I totally get that people are uncomfortable with negotiating because it is uncomfortable. It is basically an engineered conflict, and human beings naturally avoid conflict. Also understanding that in the Western hemisphere, Western, let's say Western economies, we don't negotiate a lot. There's a price on stuff. So we just take the price and we go with it. And that's just how we operate. So we don't really get to deal with the obstacle of negotiating very much. I mean, all you got to do is go to like Istanbul and go to the big bazaar in Istanbul. Like, you just go in that big old building, and like, you learn really, really quickly that if you don't negotiate, you're giving everything that you have away. Like, they will take everything out of your wallet. And so you learn really, really fast. Like, you got to like at least have 5 levels of negotiating. It's all friendly. It's all a test. It's just how everything works. But for Westerns, it's kind of tedious. But let me explain why you should know how to discount. So when my sales manager sat down with me and showed me the difference, what we also showed me was a difference in my commission checks. When my discounts were 9% and my terms and conditions were better, I was making 5 times more, and in some cases 10 times more commission. So for example, instead of making $1,000 in a deal that I sold at the lowest discount and the minimum that I could possibly get away with, or maximum I could possibly get away with in terms of terms and conditions, then in those particular situations, I might make $1,000 commission on the deal. But when I started like selling like I didn't know to stay on to sell, I was making $10,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 on those deals. So then what he showed me was, okay, so you made a lot more money. Like, you made more money in about 3 months than you did in 9 months because you were getting a much better commission check because your commission check was tied to profitability, which is true in a lot of cases for a lot of salespeople. So then what he showed me, because he was a smart guy, he's like, look, you're making more money. If you go and invest this money now, like put it in your 401k, max that out, get your match, start investing money in stocks, which I did. I bought a lot of the stocks of the companies that I sold to. Suddenly what happened was the future value of the money that I was able to put aside, because I wasn't giving my commission check away. Not only, it made it easy for me to buy a house. I mean, I was 24 years old and I bought, a 5,000 square foot home because I was making a lot more money, and a lot more money. And you can imagine in the mid 90s, 24 years old, you're making about $300,000 a year. Like, you are living large. So, but then I took that money, I started investing that money, putting those stocks away. And I did that in my 20s and 30s when I was, making these commission checks. And when I started my company, Sales Gravy, which is a large, very successful company. When I started my company, I had the money to start my company because I had taken all those commission checks that I made, all that money I made because I was a better negotiator, and it had compounded over time. And, my wife and I, we were just sitting down with our, with our finances, and I was looking back at all the stocks that I bought, all the investments that I made as a salesperson, taking those extra commissions and putting it in. And, we're multimillionaires. Liquid assets, and almost all of the money, other than what we've done in our business, but almost all of the savings, because we invest back in our business, came from the extra money that I made from being a better negotiator. So to answer your question, no, you don't have to be a great negotiator in order to sell stuff. You can go out there and give away the farm all day long. Just call enough people, give your maximum discounts, and you're going to sell stuff. But you're going to be penalized. Your income's going to be penalized. And by the way, your self-esteem gets penalized because you're just giving everything away. You're going to get penalized for doing that. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to give concessions. I would never sit here and say, well, you're going to always get 100%. You're not. I mean, I give away stuff in my own business today because there's a deal that I won't bat enough. I'm motivated enough. I'll find a way to get it. I mean, we'll do that. But the point is that if over time you're discounting less, and there's an exercise in the book, gratuitous book plug, but there's an exercise in the book that as you walk through your discounts, we can take terms and conditions into account there, and then shows you, look, if you just reduced your discount by 4%, 5%, 10%, just reduce it by that much. Overall, what would that do to your commission check? So you can start getting a calculator out and figuring that out. So that's why salespeople really need to learn how to be better negotiators, because the cumulative impact of their income over time, over multiple deals of reducing discounts and improving terms and conditions, not only for the profitability of their company, but for themselves, really adds up.
Yeah, and as you mentioned in your book, which I'm dying to read it, especially after listening to you talk.
Can't wait to read it. Is it ready?
Is it ready?
No, I was asking if the book is out.
We don't know yet. Are we able to get it yet, Jeb?
Oh yeah, it's shipping right now.
Sweet. Well, we're each gonna get a copy.
Ebook, and the audio book will be out later. This laryngitis, we were supposed to be in the studio, and laryngitis killed all that. So
yeah, for sure. So I was about to say, as important as the negotiating is that you just explained, a lot of companies aren't willing to invest in training for their salespeople to learn to negotiate, which is a darn shame, especially I'm thinking, of course, in terms of real estate, because, there's so much negotiation in there. So other than buying your book, which I'm sure all of us will be doing, what can someone do to train their brain to win the deal? Like, what are some simple things?
Well, I think, one thing is, if I'm a salesperson, I read the book and then study everything you can on negotiating. When I say that, these training courses and seminars that are like sort of these general negotiating seminars, and I've been to a couple of them, they did more to teach me how to be a negotiator when I'm buying things and to be a negotiator when I'm selling things, which feels really good, but didn't really teach me a lot. But there's benefit in that. So read everything that you can on negotiating. I would absolutely do that. I'm not taking away from anything. There are tremendous negotiating books and resources on the marketplace. I've read almost all of them, and I buy into them. The problem that most of those books have, in fact, the problem all those books have, is they do a very poor job of connecting the negotiating skills with sales skills. Those things to come together. If you're an executive and you're listening or watching this, I'm going to tell you the truth, and this is just the brutal truth. Most executives that I meet are complaining that their salespeople give too many discounts. In fact, I've heard the words over and over again, salespeople leave too much money on the table. If you choose not to train your salespeople how to negotiate, then it is you that is leaving money on the table. Now, if you want to teach them, another gratuitous plug, call me. Go to salesgravy.com. We have a sales negotiating skills training available. Click on it and call me, or buy the book and just go through the book with your team. There's a free sales negotiating planner that you can download, or you can buy them for your team if you want to get them printed already. Go through it with your team, chapter by chapter by chapter. And then when you get done, call me and we'll help you. But I also, for both sellers and for leaders, negotiating skills are perishable. So they just, over time, they go away, because negotiating is hard. It's mentally and emotionally draining, and it's tough. So you want to make sure that you're coming back to this over and over and over again. The only negotiating training that I ever went through that my company provided for me, I went through it once. It was a great couple of days. We enjoyed it, but we never talked about it ever again. We never even came back to it. There was never a review or anything. And these skills, because it's emotionally driven, you have to keep re-upping and re-upping and re-upping the skills. So I would definitely make sure that you're finding a way, to keep teaching your people how to do this. And one more thing that I would suggest doing, in my book, Objections, and in this book as well, we talk about obstacle immunity. When you face negotiating, I don't like negotiating. It's really, really tough for me. So when you face negotiating, you're going up against that wall of, I'm uncomfortable, there's conflict, I might get rejected, you're afraid to lose. So sometimes you even get attached to winning, and you do bad things. So the way that you deal with that is to face that obstacle over and over and over and over again. It's exactly what they do in Outward Bound, to teach people how to get through adversity. One of the ways that I do that, and I stay up to date with my skills, is I go to flea markets everywhere. In fact, last year I was in The Hague in the Netherlands, and there was a flea market outside of our hotel. And I just went down there and negotiated with people. I just haggled over stuff, just to see what I could do. And I would suggest doing that. Go to flea markets, go to antique stores, go places, and just go in and haggle. Haggling is not necessarily negotiating. It's extremely transactional, but the same feeling, the same emotions that you deal with when you're negotiating come to the surface. By doing that over and over and over again, you begin to teach yourself how to deal with the emotions, how to get control of that, and understand that in every single negotiation, it is the person who exerts the greatest emotional control who has the highest probability of getting the outcome that they desire.
Okay. Jeb's not aware of this, but Rachel, I got to say it. This is a sign, because we talked about this on the last interview that we just did about flea markets. Okay. All right. I hear you. I was raised working in flea markets where everyone's pushing like, when am I getting my book done? And this is a sign. This is like the second time in 2 hours we've talked about flea markets.
Yes, Jeb, I'd like you to also hold her accountable and just lean on her every chance you get. Gina's got she's got great stories, and the flea market negotiation, to your point, Jeb.
That's where I learned how to negotiate at age 10, because my father made us work in a flea market every weekend.
Absolutely. And my mom is an antique dealer and like one of the greatest negotiators I've ever known. I mean, she negotiates everything. She doesn't think about it, but it's the same thing. Like, you learned how to get past that uncomfortable feeling of negotiating with people. And that's really the key. It's like, I like watching that show Pawn Stars, because very similar thing, they negotiate, you just watch what they do, how they handle it. And it's not the same as negotiating a complex deal in sales. There's a lot on the line. It's not the same, but the emotional conflict inside of you that you feel, you're able to overcome that. Now, I am going to give you a free tip on writing your book.
Okay.
Write.
Period.
So you're saying I should just write?
Yeah, like just write, because you got to write one word to get to the second word, and then you start string a few words together, you get a sentence, and so you just have to start writing. There's no other way around it.
All right,
and by the way, if you would have seen this book, Gratuitous Book Club, go buy it. But if you'd seen this book, even 3 months ago, you would have looked at it and gone, this is the biggest pile of dog poop ever, because I'd written a lot of stuff, but it wasn't together. Books come together in the editing. So you write and then you edit. You don't try to write and edit and judge. And a lot of people have a hard time writing because they write a paragraph and then they judge themselves. And if you do that, you'll never, ever get anywhere. So you have to write with non-judgment, just write whatever, and then you come back and then you edit. And that's how books are shaped.
Maybe, Jeb, you'll write the foreword to my book.
I would be happy to do that. You just holler at me.
Anthony and Arena will be very jealous.
The other side of it is the first book that you write can suck. That I learned that listening to one of Grant Cardone's books, is he's like, just let it suck and then rewrite it better the next time,
The first book I wrote, I ended up selling 20,000 copies of that book because I just hustled my butt off. But I can't even read it now because it sucks so bad. It was awful.
Which one was it? Which one?
Power Principles. Now, it's people, it's still downloaded. People buy it. People listen to the audiobook. But the writing wasn't good. Like it wasn't the quality of writing that I have now. And every time I write a book, I get better. Like my writing gets better. The way that I structure sentences gets better. So, when you first start writing, you have the tendency to write really passive in like a passive language because you're like, you don't feel comfortable, like, boom, you do this. And then over time, as you get confident, you start moving passive language out and putting more direct language in. And it's the 10,000 hour rule. It's all of the hours, the cumulative hours that you put into writing. And, this is book number 11. And, I'm working on book number 12 right now. So that'll be out in the fall. And
which book is that?
It's called Business Outcome Selling Strategies, BOSS.
Nice. Well, I wrote a book. I have a first book, and it sucks. Like it's but once I heard Grant Cardone say that, I just was like, get it done, because now I've written a book, and people are like, oh, you have a book, and you learn the process too. As all of this is, you learn the process of how to put together the cover and how to put together the forward and all the things, and then you get better at it. Same as negotiation. Like you just have to practice and get better. And
that's exactly right. And like my first book, Power Principles, that's DNA. Like that book is DNA. And even though the book itself, I have a hard time reading it because it's not the way I write now. But when I look at every book that I've written, every single book, there is a piece of Power Principles in every single book. It's the DNA that created, the whole ecosystem that we started with. And you just got to start someplace in. I agonized over that book. I spent months and months and months, and it's not even a long book. And I worked so hard on the book. I look back now and I think, this book's 360 pages long and detailed and, excuse me, really, meaty and like the suffering that I went through to write the first one. But you're exactly right. If you don't do it, you'll never learn. So you have to write. You just got to get it done.
I got it. Okay.
Hey, one last.
I got a micro commitment from Jeb. He's going to write the foreword.
Absolutely. You tell Enarino that my voice is way sexier than him, and I got hair. So that's how it works.
Hilarious. Hey, I've got one more question about negotiation because I think it's a really important one. Is there ever a scenario where just walking away is beneficial?
So, in fact, there's a story in the book about a time when we walked away. And I was working, my team and I were working together on a deal. We've been working on for 2 years with a really large grocery store chain, multi-million-dollar deal, complex, multi-location delivery, that type of thing. And the stakeholder group had chosen us. So they had selected us as the vendor of choice. We went to procurement. Procurement brought in these draconian terms and conditions that were all in their favor that would, have severe penalties if we had any service failures. And they were beating us up because a couple of the competitors who we had, in fact, passed by because the stakeholders picked us, and coming in a lot lower than we had. But the procurement team, because they were such a large organization, they had so much buying power, they were simply unwilling to move on their terms. And it was heartbreaking. It was absolutely heartbreaking. I remember it like it was yesterday. I almost cried, but we picked our stuff up and we walked away because by getting that, if we had signed that deal just for the money, we wouldn't have made any profit, and we would have ended up failing because of the way that the deal was structured. Well, interesting thing that happened is about 18 months later, my phone rang, and it was one of the stakeholders who called me and said that the vendor that the procurement team had picked, which was the lowest bidder on this particular RFP, had failed them significantly or terribly. And they wanted to know if we would come back to the table and have a conversation. So we did. And with the experience of getting poor service, we were able to dictate the terms and conditions that would allow us to deliver. And that was 17 years ago. I don't work for that company anymore, but that grocery store chain is still my old company's customer. And by walking away and doing the right thing, being the adult in the room, then we were able to preserve both our integrity and our ability to serve our client for the long haul. So I think that for salespeople, it's not so much, know when to walk away, know when to run. It is being smart about the deals that you're working on. And when buyers are willing to work with you and come to the table and truly make an effort to make sure that you've got profit in the deal to serve them, and at the same time their job is to get the best deal for their team as well. But when they're willing to do that, then it's cool. But when you get completely shut down and people aren't willing to do anything, and you're in a take it or leave it situation, then you have some decisions that you need to make about whether or not it's the right deal for your organization. Sometimes it is, and you take the deal, and sometimes it isn't. But this is where emotional control comes in, and this is where having a full pipeline comes in, and this is where thinking the long term comes in. Yes, you can be a salesperson and sell stuff without negotiating, but you can also be the salesperson who closes the deal and gives away the farm, and everybody loses in that situation.
Thanks, Jeb. Always so much amazing stuff from you. I'm gonna ask for a micro commitment again. Besides the forward to my book, that we bring you back for the next book.
Absolutely. You can bring me back before the next book.
We'll bring you back before the next book. Maybe we'll bring you back every month.
I want to give a shout out to Jeb's team, because they not only are a great company for sales training, but they practice what they preach. Because I've been trying to get my company that I work for to engage Jeb for a speaking engagement in Atlanta, because he's based out of Atlanta, and I can't. I haven't been able to get anything nailed down, but your team is just graciously, continuously, relentlessly follows up with me. And
awesome.
and they just it's not invasive, it's just consistently persistent. And so just shout out.
I loved it. I love to hear that. Thank you so much. That makes me smile.
Yeah, your team is awesome to work with. So it's always a pleasure. Thank you again for your time. We know how busy you are, and you got this book coming out, and you powered through with your voice. So we appreciate your time, and we're going to be pushing this book out to our audience. But in the meantime, what are the best ways for them to find the book or to hire your company for training?
You can go to Amazon, you can go to Barnes & Noble, you can go to Google Play, you can go to iBooks, you can go anywhere books are sold, you'll find Inked. We have some free bonuses. If you buy the book, you can go to salesgravy.com/inked to get those free bonuses as well. And then the easiest way to get more information about me is either jebblount.com, BLUNT.com, or go to our main website, salesgravy.com, and we have tons of resources there, articles, videos, you name it. And if you want to learn more about our sales negotiating skills training, you'll also find that on the training tab on salesgravy.com.
Awesome. So everybody, again, that's salesgravy.com, really, that and jebblount.com to get everything you need to know and all the knowledge you need to get from Jeb. Always a pleasure, Jeb, having you on. I was saying we've interviewed two people today that are my business crushes, you being one, that I told you last time. So you will continue to be my business crush if that's okay with you and your wife.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot again to Jeb and to our Warners for listening to this episode of Women Your Mother Warned You About.
Thanks, Jeb.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks again to Jeb Blount for being on our show today, and to all of our Warners for listening to this episode of Women Your Mother Warned You About. To learn more about us, visit our website, womenyourmotherwarnedyouabout.com. You can also connect with me directly at ginatrimarco.com to learn more about Pivot 10 Results and Carolina Improv Company, or to book me as a speaker or trainer if you want.
Gina's a great speaker and trainer.
She's soon to be author.
For sure. And to connect with me, Rachel Pitts, you can find me all over social media as The Singing Lender. And you can reach me directly through there. And all of our social media links and cool free downloads are found on our website at womenyourmotherwarnsyouabout.com.
And of course, Keith Walters, he's not here with us today, but you can reach him on our website as well for his brilliance as a business strategist. And shout out to our sponsor, Dermavogue, who keeps us prettier than we already are. Check them out at dermavogue.com. Also on our website is a link to iTunes where you can leave us a rating and a review in case we didn't mention that earlier. But hey, if you love our show, show the love and share it with a friend, colleague, or client. Just one way to give value with a free resource to others and strengthen those business relationships without expecting anything in return. It's the giver's game. Warners, keep on keeping it sexy. And remember, for the best relationships, keep it real, raw, and relevant.
And a little irreverence doesn't hurt either.
Bye, Warners. Bye, Rachel. This really will get serious soon.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to. I don't think anybody wants it to be serious.